Looking at the provided files, I'll write chapters 1-3 following the detailed outline, ensuring exactly 3,000 words, while adhering to the emotional arc and frameworks specified. Never let your family turn you into their personal chef. Here's what happens when you finally say no. At 10 p.m. on Tuesday night, my phone buzzed. Dad's name flashed across the screen, and I already knew this wasn't going to be good news. "Rebecca," his voice boomed through the speaker before I even finished saying hello. "I've got the final guest list for Thursday." My stomach dropped. Thursday. Thanksgiving. The day I'd been dreading for weeks, knowing it would be another marathon cooking session while everyone else watched football and complained about the food temperature. "How many?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. 30 people. "Your mother's side decided to join us this year, plus the Johnsons from next door." "Oh, and make sure you start cooking at 4 a.m. sharp. Everything needs to be perfect this time." The casual way he delivered this news, like he was asking me to pick up milk from the grocery store, made my hands shake. 30 people. That meant I'd need at least 4 turkeys, enough sides to feed a small army, and probably 3 different dessert options because, God forbid, anyone go without their preferred pie. I've been the designated family chef for 5 consecutive years now. It started innocently enough. I made a decent green bean casserole for a potluck once, and suddenly I was the cook of the family. What began as bringing one side dish evolved into preparing the entire feast single-handedly while my 3 siblings sat around arguing about football stats, and my parents entertained guests in the living room. Last year, I spent $847 of my own money on groceries. $847. I kept the receipts because some masochistic part of me needed to see the damage in black and white. Turkey, ham, prime rib because Uncle Gary doesn't eat bird. Organic vegetables because Cousin Sarah is basically vegetarian now. Gluten-free stuffing because Nephew Tyler has celiac disease. And sugar-free pumpkin pie because Aunt Linda is diabetic. The list went on and on, each dietary restriction adding another layer of complexity and another trip to specialty stores. But here's what really made my blood boil. Not one person offered to help pay for anything. Not one person volunteered to bring even a bag of dinner rolls. They showed up empty-handed, ate until they couldn't move, complained that the turkey was a little dry this year, or the mashed potatoes could use more salt. Then left me with a kitchen that looked like a hurricane had torn through it. Mountains of dishes, greasy pans soaking in cold water, and turkey carcasses stinking up the garbage cans. The worst part wasn't even the money or the mess. It was the complete lack of appreciation. While I was in the kitchen, from sunrise to sunset, basting turkeys and timing side dishes like a military operation, they were in the living room making family memories I wasn't part of. I'd catch glimpses of them through the kitchen doorway, laughing at old stories, kids playing board games, adults debating politics, and I felt like hired staff watching a party I wasn't invited to join. "And Rebecca," Dad continued, pulling me back to the present conversation, "your mother wants you to add that cranberry sauce recipe you found online last year, the one with the orange zest. Also, can you make sure there's enough food this time? Last year, people were going for seconds, and we almost ran out of stuffing. Almost ran out of stuffing." I had made enough stuffing to feed 60 people last year. But apparently that wasn't sufficient for 30 guests who treated my dining room like an all-you-can-eat buffet. The audacity was breathtaking. Sure, Dad, I heard myself saying, the words coming out automatically, even though every fibre of my being wanted to scream. I'll make sure there's plenty of food. Great. Oh, and start the prep work tomorrow night. You know how you get stressed when you wait until the last minute. I get stressed. As if stress was some character flaw of mine rather than a natural response to being expected to single-handedly cater a feast for 30 people with less than 48 hours' notice. After we hung up, I sat in my living room staring at the wall, feeling something I'd never quite experienced before. It wasn't just anger or frustration, emotions I was well acquainted with after years of holiday exploitation. This was something deeper, more crystalline, a moment of absolute clarity. They treated me like hired staff, not family. But hired staff gets paid, hired staff gets help, hired staff gets appreciation and recognition for their work. I got none of those things. I got expectations, criticism, and the privilege of funding their feast out of my own pocket. I looked at my laptop screen where I'd been browsing vacation deals earlier that evening. A last-minute flight to Cancun caught my eye, departing Thursday morning at 6 a.m. The price was steep for such short notice, but then I thought about the $847 I'd spent last year, plus the hundreds more I'd inevitably spend this year. Suddenly, a beach vacation seemed like a bargain, but this year something inside me snapped. At 2 a.m., I was still awake, laptop open, cursor hovering over the Book Now button for that Cancun flight. The rational part of my brain kept listing all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Family drama, hurt feelings, years of guilt tripping that would follow. But another part of my brain, a part that had been silenced for far too long, was doing different math. 5 years of Thanksgiving prep, approximately 40 hours of cooking and cleaning each year. 200 hours of unpaid labour, thousands of dollars in groceries, countless family gatherings where I watched from the kitchen while everyone else made memories. The math didn't add up to love or appreciation. It added up to exploitation. I clicked Book Now. The confirmation email hit my inbox at 2:17 a.m. Flight 447 to Cancun, departing at 6 a.m. Thursday morning. Seat 12A, window seat naturally. I wanted to watch Detroit disappear beneath the clouds while 30 hungry relatives discovered what Thanksgiving looked like without their designated servant. The next 18 hours passed in a strange bubble of calm determination. I went through the motions of my regular Wednesday, work meetings, grocery runs, but not for Thanksgiving supplies. Normal life things. Every time my phone rang with a family member wanting to coordinate some aspect of Thursday's feast, I let it go to voicemail. I'd deal with the fallout later. Right now, I was focused on something I hadn't prioritised in years, my own peace of mind. At 11 p.m. Wednesday night, I set my alarm for 4 a.m, not to start cooking, but to catch my flight. I packed a single carry-on bag with sundresses, swimsuits, and sunscreen. Everything I'd need for a long weekend of doing absolutely nothing for anyone but myself. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the first time in 5 years, I was getting up at 4 a.m. on Thanksgiving by choice, not obligation. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about what they'd find when they arrived Thursday afternoon. An empty kitchen, no smell of roasting turkey filling the house. No carefully timed meal waiting to be served, just silence. And the dawning realization that their holiday traditions had been built on the back of someone who'd finally decided she deserved better. What they found at 2 p.m. changed everything. The alarm buzzed at 4 a.m., but I was already awake, adrenaline coursing through my veins like I was about to bungee jump off a cliff. In a way, I suppose I was. I was about to do something that would fundamentally alter my relationship with my family, possibly forever. But as I brushed my teeth in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt something I hadn't experienced on a Thanksgiving morning in years: excitement. By 4:30, I was in my car, driving through empty streets toward the airport. Normally at this time, I'd be in my kitchen, surrounded by raw turkeys and mountains of vegetables, mentally calculating cooking times and oven space like a general planning a military campaign. Instead, I was listening to reggae music and thinking about ordering room service on a beach. The flight was blissfully uneventful. I dozed off somewhere over Tennessee and woke up to the pilot announcing our descent into Cancun. Through the window, I could see pristine blue water and white sand beaches. It was 72 degrees and sunny. Back in Detroit, it was 34 degrees with a chance of snow. By 11 a.m. Central Time, noon back home, I was checked into my resort, wearing a sundress and flip-flops, sipping a mimosa by the pool. I'd turned my phone to airplane mode during takeoff and hadn't turned it back on. Whatever chaos was unfolding in my parents' kitchen was happening without my knowledge, and that felt absolutely liberating. I knew the timeline by heart. Around noon, Mum would start getting antsy about food prep. By 12:30, she'd be calling me to ask when I planned to start the turkey. When those calls went to voicemail, she'd send Dad to my apartment to check on me. They'd find it empty, my car gone, no sign of Tenena's Thanksgiving preparations anywhere. The guests would start arriving around 2 p.m, expecting to walk into a house filled with the warm smells of a holiday feast. Instead, they'd find my parents in full panic mode, probably standing in the kitchen staring at empty countertops, finally understanding what I'd been doing for them all these years. At exactly 2 p.m. Cancun time, 3 p.m. Detroit time, I turned my phone back on. It exploded with notifications. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages. The family group chat had accumulated over 200 messages. I scrolled through them while sipping my second mimosa, watching the drama unfold in real time through frantic text messages. Mum, 12:47 p.m. Rebecca, where are you? People are starting to ask about dinner. Dad, 1:15 p.m. Your apartment is empty. Where the hell are you? My brother Mike, 1:23 p.m. Dude, where's Rebecca? Grandma keeps asking when we're eating. Sister Sarah, 1:45 p.m. This isn't funny anymore. We have 30 people here and no food. The group chat was pure chaos. Extended family members were asking what was happening. Some were offering to order pizza. Others were suggesting everyone just go home. My cousin Jennifer had apparently driven to 3 different grocery stores trying to find a pre-cooked turkey with no success because, shockingly, most people don't wait until 2 p.m. on Thanksgiving to start shopping for dinner. But here's what struck me most as I read through the messages. Not one person expressed concern for my well-being. Not one person asked if I was okay or safe. The only concern was about the missing meal. I wasn't a person to them. I was a function. The food function. And when that function failed to perform, their first instinct wasn't worry about the human being behind it. but frustration that their expectations weren't being met. At 2:30 p.m., I composed a single text message and sent it to the family group chat. Hope you all are learning to appreciate the effort that goes into making Thanksgiving happen. I'm exactly where I deserve to be, relaxing. I attached a photo of my feet in the sand, ocean waves in the background, a tropical drink in frame. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone started buzzing with incoming calls, which I promptly declined. The group chat went absolutely nuclear. Messages were flying so fast, I couldn't even read them all. But the general themes were clear: anger, guilt-tripping, accusations of selfishness, and a healthy dose of panic about what to do with 30 hungry people. Dad, this is the most selfish thing you've ever done. Mum, how could you abandon your family on Thanksgiving? Uncle Gary, what kind of person does this to their own family? But mixed in with the criticism were some interesting revelations. My cousin Michelle had apparently been dealing with similar expectations at her in-laws' house. Aunt Linda admitted she'd always felt guilty about not helping more. Even my brother Mike eventually sent a private message. Okay, I get why you're pissed. This is kind of insane when you think about it. The best part was watching them scramble for solutions in real time through their messages. Someone suggested ordering Chinese food. Another person found a restaurant that was open and could accommodate a large party, but it would cost $2,000 for 30 people. Suddenly, the financial reality of feeding that many people was hitting them in a way it never had when I was footing the bill. By 4 p.m., according to the timestamps on their messages, they'd given up on a traditional dinner and ordered a collection of pizzas, Chinese takeout, and whatever else they could find open on Thanksgiving Day. The total cost, according to Dad's increasingly frustrated messages, was over $300 just for mediocre food that couldn't even feed everyone properly. $300 for one meal that nobody enjoyed compared to the $800 plus I spent each year creating a feast they took for granted. The mathematics of appreciation were finally becoming clear to them. But their reaction was worse than I expected. By Thursday evening, the family group chat had devolved into something resembling a digital war zone. What started as panic about the missing Thanksgiving dinner had escalated into a full-blown family crisis, with battle lines drawn and alliances forming in ways I never could have predicted. From my poolside lounge chair, margarita in hand, I watched 5 years of suppressed family dynamics explode in real time through a stream of increasingly unhinged text messages. The guilt tripping started almost immediately after my beach photo. Mom deployed every manipulation technique in her considerable arsenal. How could you do this to your grandmother? She's been looking forward to your stuffing all year. Never mind that Grandma Ruth had complained about my stuffing being too salty every single year, or that she'd spent last Thanksgiving telling anyone who would listen that her own mother's recipe was superior. Dad went the anger route. This is what we get for spoiling you. You're acting like a spoiled brat. The irony was breathtaking. I was spoiled because I'd spent 5 years cooking elaborate feasts for 30 people at my own expense. I was spoiled because I'd finally decided my time and money were worth something. But the really interesting developments came from the extended family members who weren't part of the core manipulation dynamic. My cousin Jennifer, Uncle Bob's daughter, started asking pointed questions in the group chat. Wait, Rebecca pays for all the food every year? I had no idea. Uncle Bob himself chimed in. I just assumed everyone contributed to groceries. Rebecca, I had no clue you were covering everything yourself. Suddenly, family members who had been happily accepting free meals for years were learning the financial reality behind their traditions. The conversation shifted from how could Rebecca abandon us to why was Rebecca paying for everything? It was fascinating to watch the narrative change as people began to understand the scope of what I'd been shouldering alone. My phone rang constantly. When I didn't answer, they started calling the hotel. The concierge informed me that someone claiming to be my father had called 3 times, asking to be connected to my room. I politely declined all calls and ordered another drink. This was my vacation, purchased with money I would have spent on their ungrateful feast. And I intended to enjoy every moment of it. The most revealing messages came later that evening, when people started sharing their honest reactions to the day's chaos. My sister Sarah, who had been guilt-tripping me earlier, sent a private message around 9 p.m. Okay, I'm starting to get it. Today was insane. I never realized how much work goes into Thanksgiving until we had to figure it out ourselves. But it was my younger brother Mike who really surprised me. He'd always been the family diplomat, staying out of conflicts and maintaining relationships with everyone. His message came in around 10 p.m. Detroit time. Becca, I owe you an apology, not just for today, but for the last 5 years. I never thought about what you were actually doing for all of us. Today sucked, but you know what? Maybe it needed to suck. Maybe we needed to see what we were taking for granted. The group chat screenshots kept coming through the evening, and I could see the family fracturing along interesting lines. The older generation, my parents and their siblings, maintained that I was being selfish and dramatic. But the younger cousins, and even some of the middle generation, were starting to question the arrangement that had been in place. My cousin Michelle, who I'd always been close to, posted a long message around 11 p.m. Can we talk about how messed up it is that we all just accepted Rebecca working her arse off every year while we sat around watching football? Like, when did that become normal? When did we decide it was okay to let one person handle everything? That message triggered a cascade of responses. Cousin David admitted he'd always felt weird about not contributing, but didn't know how to bring it up. Aunt Linda said she'd offered to help with cooking before, but was told, Rebecca has it handled. Uncle Gary, the same Uncle Gary who had called me selfish earlier, grudgingly acknowledged that maybe they should have been more appreciative. But the real bombshell came from my brother Mike's wife, Jessica, who apparently had been biting her tongue for 3 years of marriage into our family. Her message was a masterpiece of suppressed frustration finally finding its voice. Since we're being honest here, I've watched this dynamic for 3 years. And it's been really uncomfortable. Mike and I have tried to help with dishes and clean up, but we're always told Rebecca has it under control. Meanwhile, Rebecca's in the kitchen, stressed out of her mind, while everyone else relaxes. I've wanted to say something for years, but didn't feel like it was my place as the new person. Well, now I'm saying it. This arrangement was unfair, and y'all should be ashamed it took Rebecca disappearing for you to realise it. The silence that followed Jessica's message was deafening. For about an hour, nobody responded to anything in the group chat. When people finally started typing again, the tone had shifted completely. The blame was starting to turn inward, toward the family system that had created this situation, rather than outward toward me for refusing to participate in it anymore. Around midnight Detroit time, I sent one more message to the group chat. I hope everyone had a memorable Thanksgiving. I know I did. This conversation is exactly what needed to happen. See you all when I get back. Then I turned my phone to airplane mode and went to sleep to the sound of ocean waves. Friday morning brought a completely different energy to the family communications. I turned my phone back on over breakfast. Actual room service breakfast that I didn't have to cook or clean up after, and found a drastically reduced number of messages. The frantic panic had been replaced by something more thoughtful, more introspective. Mum had sent a private message at 6 a.m. Rebecca, your father and I talked most of the night. We owe you a serious conversation when you get home. We're sorry. We didn't realise how much pressure we'd put on you over the years. That message surprised me more than anything else that had happened. Mum wasn't typically one for apologies or admissions of fault. The fact that she was acknowledging the pressure and taking responsibility for creating it suggested that Thursday's disaster had genuinely opened their eyes to something they'd been blind to for years. Dad's message was shorter, but equally surprising. You were right to leave. We took advantage of you and called it family tradition. That's on us, not you. But the messages that really got to me came from family members I hadn't expected to hear from. Great Aunt Dorothy, who was 83 years old and had been coming to our Thanksgivings for decades, sent a message that made me cry right there at the breakfast table. Honey, I'm so sorry we made you feel unappreciated. Your cooking always reminded me of my own mother's, and I should have told you that instead of just assuming you knew. You've been carrying all of us for years, and that wasn't fair to you. My teenage nephew Tyler, who I'd been making special gluten-free dishes for since his celiac diagnosis, wrote, Aunt Rebecca, I never thanked you for always making sure I had stuff I could eat. Yesterday, I realised how much extra work that was, and I felt really bad that I never said anything. You're the best aunt ever. Even some of the family members who had been most critical on Thursday were starting to come around. Uncle Gary, who had called me selfish, sent a grudging message. Maybe I was too harsh yesterday. Your grandmother always said I had a big mouth and a small brain. Guess she was right again. The most interesting development was watching how the younger generation was processing all of this. My cousin Jennifer had apparently spent Friday morning researching the actual cost of feeding 30 people for Thanksgiving. Her message included a detailed breakdown. I did some math. A proper Thanksgiving dinner for 30 people costs between $600 and $800 if you do it right. Plus, probably 15-20 hours of prep and cooking time. Rebecca, you were basically running a catering business for free every year. That's insane. But it wasn't just about the money or the time. The emotional labour was starting to become visible to them too. Jessica, Mike's wife, sent another thoughtful message. I keep thinking about how Rebecca had to remember everyone's dietary restrictions, preferences, and special requests. She had to coordinate timing so everything was ready at the same time. She had to shop for everything, prep everything, cook everything, and then clean up after everyone. And she did it with a smile while we all complained if something wasn't exactly how we liked it. The more I think about it, the more ashamed I am that we all participated in that. By Friday afternoon, something unprecedented was happening in our family group chat. People were actually organising to help with future holidays. Cousin Michelle suggested setting up a rotation system where different family members take turns hosting. David offered to handle all the turkey preparation going forward. Aunt Linda volunteered to coordinate side dishes so the burden wouldn't fall on one person. Even more surprisingly, several people started talking about contributing financially to holiday meals. Uncle Bob said he'd always assumed my parents were covering the grocery costs and offered to chip in for future gatherings. Jennifer suggested everyone contribute $20-30 per person to cover food costs, which would more than cover the expenses and take that burden off whoever was hosting. The transformation was remarkable. In less than 24 hours, my family had gone from a group of people who took elaborate holiday meals for granted to a group actively problem-solving how to make the arrangement more equitable. My disappearing act had forced them to confront not just the practical reality of what I'd been doing, but the emotional reality of how they'd been treating me. But the conversation that really mattered happened Saturday morning, when my phone rang with a call from Mike. This time I answered. "Becca, can we talk?" His voice was different, more serious than I'd heard in years. "Sure," I said, settling into a beach chair with my coffee. "What's up?" "I've been thinking about this whole situation, and I need to say some things. First, I'm sorry, not just for this week, but for years of letting you carry all of this alone. I think somewhere along the way we all started treating you like you were the family cruise director instead of our sister and daughter." I felt tears starting to form. This was the conversation I'd been needing for years without even realising it. "You know what really got to me?" Mike continued. "Yesterday, when we were all scrambling to figure out food, Mum kept saying Rebecca would know what to do, or Rebecca always handles this. And I realised we'd turned you into this role where you weren't even a person anymore. You were just the person who solved problems and made everything work smoothly." "That's exactly what it felt like," I said quietly, like I was the hired help, not family. "And the worst part is we convinced ourselves we were doing you a favour by letting you handle everything. Like we were giving you the honour of being in charge. But really, we were just being lazy and selfish." We talked for almost an hour. Mike told me about conversations he'd had with other family members over the past 2 days. Apparently, my escape had triggered a lot of soul-searching and honest discussions that had been overdue for years. "Jessica said something that really stuck with me," he continued. "She said that in healthy families, holiday stress gets shared, not dumped on one person. And she's right, we created this system where your stress was the price of everyone else's relaxation." By Saturday evening, the family group chat had evolved into something I'd never seen before: actual collaborative planning for future holidays. People were volunteering for specific tasks, discussing potluck arrangements, and even suggesting we rotate hosting duties among different households so no one person would be overwhelmed. My parents had booked a call with me for Sunday morning to have what Mum was calling a serious family discussion. For the first time in years, I was actually looking forward to a conversation with them. Not because I expected everything to magically be perfect, but because it felt like they were finally ready to see me as a person rather than a function. The 3-day fallout from my Thanksgiving escape had accomplished something that 5 years of subtle hints and increasing frustration never could. It had made my family understand what they were actually asking of me and what they stood to lose if they kept taking it for granted. As I watched the sunset over the Caribbean on Saturday night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years during holiday season. Peace. Not just the temporary peace of being away from family drama, but the deeper peace that comes from knowing your boundaries have been respected, your contributions have been acknowledged, and your relationships are finally built on mutual understanding rather than one-sided obligation. Sunday morning brought the conversation that would reshape our family dynamics forever. I had scheduled a video call with my parents from my hotel room, and for the first time in recent memory, I was approaching a family discussion without dread. The crisis had cleared the air in a way that years of subtle complaints never could. Mum appeared on screen, looking genuinely remorseful. An expression I wasn't sure I'd ever seen on her face before during a family conflict. Dad sat beside her, equally serious. The usual defensiveness and justification that typically characterize our difficult conversations were notably absent. Rebecca, Mum started, and her voice had a quality I'd never heard before, vulnerable, almost fragile. Your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking since Thursday, and we owe you more than just an apology. We owe you a complete acknowledgement of how wrong we've been. This was already going differently than I'd expected. Usually family conversations about my complaints involved a lot of, but we didn't mean it that way, and you're being too sensitive. This felt like actual accountability. Dad leaned forward. We turned you into the family servant without ever asking if you wanted that role. And then we acted like you should be grateful for the opportunity to serve everyone else. What really opened our eyes, Mum continued, was listening to the extended family over the past few days. Hearing Jennifer break down the actual cost of what you were doing, hearing Jessica talk about the emotional labour, hearing Tyler realise he'd never even thanked you for accommodating his dietary needs. It made us realise we weren't just taking you for granted, we were actively exploiting your generosity. I felt a lump forming in my throat. These were words I'd been needing to hear for years, but I'd almost given up hope of ever hearing them. The thing is, Dad said, we told ourselves we were honouring you by giving you control of the holidays. We said things like, Rebecca's so good at this, and Rebecca likes everything to be perfect, as if we were doing you a favour. But really, we were just finding ways to avoid taking responsibility ourselves. And when you tried to hint that it was too much, Mum added, we brushed off your concerns, because acknowledging them would have meant having to change, and change was inconvenient for the rest of us. We talked for over 2 hours. They asked detailed questions about what the past 5 years had actually been like for me. the financial stress, the physical exhaustion, the emotional isolation of being in the kitchen while everyone else bonded in the living room. They listened without defending, without minimizing, without trying to redirect the conversation back to their own feelings. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. What we want to know, Dad said toward the end of our call, is what would make holidays actually enjoyable for you going forward. Not just tolerable, but genuinely enjoyable. What would that look like? I had been thinking about this question since Thursday, and I had a clear answer. I want to be a guest at family gatherings sometimes, not always the host. I want to contribute to the meal, not provide the entire meal. I want my financial contributions to be acknowledged and shared by others, and I want my time to be valued the same way everyone else's time is valued. Done, Mum said immediately. All of that, whatever it takes. But the real test of their newfound understanding came when we started talking about practical changes. It's one thing to apologize and acknowledge past mistakes. It's another thing to commit to concrete behavioral changes going forward. They had already started implementing changes for Christmas. Instead of assuming I'd handle everything, they were organising a potluck system where every family unit contributed specific dishes. They were pooling money for groceries so no one person bore the financial burden. And they were rotating hosting duties so the work would be shared. Actually, Dad said with a slight smile, the organising has been kind of eye-opening in itself. Just coordinating who's bringing what and making sure we have everything covered has been a project. It's made us realise how much planning and mental energy goes into what you were doing. Mum nodded. And we're only dealing with the coordination. You were doing all of that, plus the actual shopping, cooking and cleaning. No wonder you were exhausted. The most meaningful part of the conversation came toward the end, when we started talking about our relationship beyond just holiday dynamics. The holiday exploitation had been a symptom of a broader pattern, where my role in the family was defined by what I could provide for others, rather than who I was as a person. I think we stopped seeing you as our daughter and started seeing you as the family problem solver, Mum said. And that's not fair to you, and it's not healthy for our relationship. Going forward, Dad added, we want to know about your life, your goals, your problems, your achievements, not just when you're available to handle family logistics. By the time we hung up, I felt something I'd never experienced after a family conflict. Complete resolution, not the temporary peace that comes from avoiding difficult topics, but the deep satisfaction that comes from being truly heard and understood. The ripple effects of my Thanksgiving disappearance continued throughout my remaining days in Cancun. Extended family members kept reaching out individually to apologize, to ask questions about my experience, and to commit to doing better going forward. Some conversations were brief acknowledgements, others were lengthy discussions about family dynamics and mutual respect. My cousin Jennifer called to tell me that my escape had inspired her to set boundaries with her in-laws, who had been expecting her to handle all their holiday cooking as well. Watching you choose yourself over everyone else's convenience gave me permission to do the same thing, she said. Jessica, Mike's wife, sent a long message about how the weekend's events had sparked important conversations in her marriage about equitable division of labour and family obligations. Mike's been doing a lot of thinking about other ways he takes my contributions for granted, she wrote. Your disappearing act didn't just change holiday dynamics. It started conversations about fairness that were long overdue. Even the family members who had been most resistant were coming around. Uncle Gary, who had initially been angry and critical, called me directly to apologise. Your grandmother always said I was a stubborn old fool, and she was right, he said. I was so focused on what I thought family loyalty looked like that I couldn't see we were being disloyal to you. By the time I boarded my flight back to Detroit on Sunday evening, I wasn't returning to the same family dynamic I'd left. The crisis had forced everyone to examine assumptions they'd held for years, and the examination had led to genuine changes in how they viewed both me and family responsibilities more generally. But perhaps the most important change was in myself. For the first time in my adult life, I had prioritised my own well-being over family expectations, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, the relationships had improved. By refusing to accept being taken for granted, I had modelled for my family what respectful treatment looked like. The financial implications were striking too. Instead of spending $800+ on groceries for people who complained about my cooking, I had spent $1,200 on a weekend vacation that recharged my spirit and reset my family relationships. The return on investment was incomparable. As the plane descended into Detroit, I thought about upcoming Christmas plans. For the first time in years, I was actually looking forward to the holiday season. Not because the work would be easier, though it would be, but because I would be participating as a valued family member rather than an unpaid caterer. My phone buzzed with a message from Mike. Can't wait to hear about your trip. And just so you know, I already bought groceries for Christmas dinner. It's my turn to cook. I smiled, looking out the airplane window at the lights of my city below. I was coming home to a family that finally saw me clearly. And it felt like the best gift I'd ever received. The transformation wasn't just about holidays or cooking or financial contributions. It was about dignity, respect, and the fundamental right to be valued for who you are rather than what you can provide. And it had taken disappearing for 3 days to make that visible to everyone. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their dysfunction. Sometimes the most radical act is simply choosing yourself.